I would ask you to tell this court what you were thinking at the time was happening. What did you make of that military buildup at the border with Ukraine?
This was the second such buildup. The first occurred earlier in 2021 and then disappeared. And then we saw this subsequent buildup. I figured the first buildup was possibly a rehearsal. It was a logistics exercise, training exercise, and a sort of effort by Russia to say, I'm thinking seriously about pressuring Ukraine. The second buildup was much more ominous because it was accompanied by statements from Russia, from Mr. Putin, about the illegitimacy of Ukraine as a nation, and also there was a lot of let's say, misinformation thrown out there where various people would say, you better negotiate or else, and then they'd say, oh, but we have no intention of attacking. And so this pattern of communication is, it's characteristic of what would happen before an operation, and which is an effort to throw off the preparations of the defending party. Now, whether Mr. Putin had made the decision at that point or not, but looking at what was, that the statements that were made, the demands that Russia made in December of 2021 that NATO return to the pre-1997 condition, that is, dissociate itself from Poland, the Baltic states, and so forth. These weren't demands that were likely to be met. These were demands that were designed to be denied and serve as a pretext for an invasion. And so I looked at this as very serious. And then when you couple that with frequent denials of Russian civilian leaders, Lavrov and others who would make statements saying, no, we're not going to invade. That's what happens. During my time as NATO commander, starting with my first visit to an East European country in 1997. Then Foreign Minister Nadezhda Mikhailova told me, she said, Bulgaria has to be a member of NATO. I said, but why? She said, because today Russia is weak, but someday Russia will be strong again. And before then, Bulgaria must be a member of NATO. I got the same message from all across Eastern Europe. Anyone who'd ever dealt with Russian occupation or leadership, Russian imperialism, they understood exactly what the message was. And if you look at the record of the last 23 years, 23 plus years since that time, it's been a steady effort by Mr. Putin to reassemble what you would call the Soviet space. He does it by hook and by crook, by economic blandishments. The Poles told me at the time, they said, he's trying to take over Poland's electricity grid through these Russian companies. And he does it by force, as he displayed in 2008 in Georgia and again in 2014 in Ukraine. Well, this was an effort to dominate Ukraine. Now, if you look at how it unfolded, it was clearly designed to be a coup de main to take out President Zelensky, replace the government with a Putin agent who was reportedly waiting in Russia or maybe in Belarus. It could have been Mr. Yanukovych, it could have been someone else. I've heard both names suggested. And then dismember the Ukrainian armed forces, intelligence agency, and political establishment, which sought to establish relations with the West. It was not sized to be able to run a complete military conquest against an opposing state the size of Ukraine. And at the time, the Ukrainians, they told us that. But we looked at it. We know what what the United States did in Iraq with its force invading a country of 25 million with about 100,000 troops, we knew what could conceivably be accomplished by a small force. So there was no question this was an effort at regime change in Ukraine, and more than that, it was an effort to eradicate Ukraine as a nation state culture and heritage.
Well, let me just, you've stated, I think, quite clearly what you think motivates him. But what do you think he fears about, or what did he fear from Ukraine in 2022 that would cause him to assemble this army?
Yeah, he was afraid of a democratic, Western-oriented Ukraine, which would cast a shadow on his rule, undercut his legitimacy in Moscow, and make it more difficult for him to control Russia, honestly, because Ukraine and its common language and the intermarriage and travel and so forth, Ukraine would have been like an infectious agent, undercutting the mythology of Russian domination, of Putin and the old intelligence apparatus dominating Russia. And Mr. Putin recognized it, that if Ukraine became westernized and associated with the European Union, that it would provide possibly a fatal infection to his control of Russia. And this was his fear. Planning an operation like this was complex logistically and operationally. So it couldn't have been done overnight. It was not the work of a couple of weeks and not the work of a month or two. As we learned about the occupation of Crimea in 2014, it was that was sort of an off-the-shelf plan that had been previously set up. This may well have been an off-the-shelf plan originated a decade previously, 5 years previously, 2 years previously, a year previously. Certainly it was being worked before the spring of 2021 because those many of the same forces were brought forward.